Richard's final move was elegant in its cruelty. He offered Marcus a choice: publicly admit to corporate espionage and conspiracy, or watch as Richard destroyed not just his business, but revealed Marcus's secret that would ruin him forever. Marcus's response chilled them both. "You think you're protecting her, but Alicia doesn't know what I really took from you." The war Richard had declared was about to become something much more dangerous, a battle where the truth itself was a weapon that could destroy them all. The secret Marcus stole wasn't just a government contract or a woman's heart. It was information that could bring down Richard's entire empire. The USB drive Marcus placed on the glass table seemed insignificant, but its contents glowed on the laptop screen like evidence of sins that money couldn't wash clean, while Atlanta's skyline bore witness through the windows. Alicia stared at the financial documents, bank records, and encrypted emails that painted a picture of her husband she'd never imagined possible. Richard Callahan, the man she'd married for his integrity as much as his success, had built his empire on a foundation of carefully orchestrated lies. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the tension crackling between them. Shell companies in Delaware. Government contracts awarded after private meetings that were never disclosed. Your husband didn't just bend rules, Alicia. He broke them systematically for years. The evidence was overwhelming. Contracts awarded to Callahan Enterprises minutes after competitors withdrew their bids under mysterious circumstances. Environmental reports that disappeared from government databases. Safety inspections that were never conducted despite official documentation claiming otherwise. "This is why you seduced me." Alicia's voice came out strangled. "To get access to Richard's personal information so you could destroy him?" Marcus closed the laptop, his expression grim. "I seduced you because you were lonely and beautiful and married to a man who treated you like another acquisition. The business intelligence was—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "A beneficial side effect." "Don't." Alicia stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the city. "Don't try to make this romantic. You used me to gather evidence against my husband. I used information you volunteered during intimate conversations to build a case against a man who's been corrupting federal contracts for a decade." Marcus's voice hardened. "Richard Callahan has stolen hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars, Alicia. He's built his empire on fraud." The words hit her like physical blows. Every luxury in their penthouse, every expensive dinner, every charitable donation that made Richard look like Atlanta's golden boy. All of it potentially financed by stolen government money. "The Morrison Industries deal," she whispered, remembering Richard's excitement about the contract. "The one that fell through because of the London negotiations. Would have been worth $200 million in taxpayer funds for substandard work. Richard's company submitted false environmental impact reports and paid off 2 inspectors to approve construction in protected wetlands." Alicia closed her eyes, remembering Richard's rage when the deal collapsed, his accusations that competitors had sabotaged his negotiations. The truth was worse. Marcus had simply ensured the government discovered what Richard was trying to hide. "How long have you known?" 3 years. I've been building a case against Richard since he stole the Atlanta airport expansion contract from my company. He didn't win that bid with a better proposal. He won it with bribes and falsified safety reports." Marcus opened another file on his laptop, showing her photographs of construction defects, inspection reports that had been altered, bank transfers to government officials who'd voted in Richard's favor. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption that made her husband look like a criminal mastermind. "Why didn't you report this to the FBI years ago?" "I tried. Richard has connections throughout the federal prosecutor's office. My evidence was dismissed as corporate jealousy, business rivals making false accusations." Marcus's voice turned bitter. "Turns out you need more than documentation to take down a man with Richard's political connections. So you decided to seduce his wife instead?" "I decided to gather personal intelligence that would make my case impossible to dismiss. Financial records from your home computer. Personal phone calls where Richard discussed illegal activities. evidence that came from inside his marriage. The implications hit Alicia like a sledgehammer. Every conversation she'd shared with Marcus about Richard's stress, his late-night phone calls, his concerns about government inspections, all of it had been gathered as evidence in a federal case. "The pregnancy," she said suddenly. "You didn't plan for this to happen." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "No, that was—" He struggled with the words. "That was real, Alicia. Whatever else I lied about, what happened between us in bed was honest. If you discovered someone you loved had built their success on questionable foundations, could you still love them? Where do you draw the line between loyalty and morality? But you're still planning to use our child as leverage. I'm planning to protect our child from being raised by a man who's about to be indicted for federal crimes." Marcus's voice turned urgent. "Alicia, when this evidence goes public, Richard won't just lose his business. He'll lose everything. His freedom, his reputation, his ability to provide for any children." The room spun around her as the full scope of the situation became clear. Richard wasn't just fighting for his marriage. He was fighting for his freedom. The war between him and Marcus wasn't about pride or revenge. It was about survival. "How long before the FBI moves?" "Weeks, maybe less. My contact says they're preparing arrest warrants for Richard and 12 other executives in his company." Alicia sank into a chair, one hand pressed to her growing belly. The babies she carried would be born into a world where their father was either a federal prisoner or a man who destroyed the only evidence of his crimes by eliminating the person who'd gathered it. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Richard knows I have this information. That's why he's moving so aggressively against me financially. He's not just trying to win you back. He's trying to destroy me before I can testify." "Testify?" "The FBI offered me immunity in exchange for cooperation. All of this evidence, plus my testimony about how I gathered it, would guarantee Richard's conviction." The choice crystallized before her with terrible clarity. Marcus could destroy Richard with the evidence he'd gathered through their affair, sending her husband to federal prison and leaving her to raise 2 children alone. Or Richard could destroy Marcus first, eliminating the witness and the evidence, but confirming his guilt through his actions. Either way, her children would grow up in the shadow of this war. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Help me convince Richard to take a plea bargain. The prosecutors would accept a deal, full restitution, resignation from all government contracts, 10 years probation instead of 20 years in prison." Marcus moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "Alicia, I never wanted this to hurt you or the babies. But Richard's crimes have victims. Families who lost their homes to his illegal construction, taxpayers whose money he stole, competitors whose businesses he destroyed with fraud. So I'm supposed to betray my husband to save strangers? You're supposed to save your husband from destroying himself and everyone around him." Marcus's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "If Richard continues down this path, if he tries to eliminate me instead of accepting responsibility, he'll confirm every criminal charge against him. The FBI will have no choice but to prosecute fully." Alicia's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Coming home now. We need to talk about your visit with Marcus." The message sent ice through her veins. Richard's tone suggested he already knew about her meeting with Marcus, which meant he was having her followed, which meant he was moving beyond legal warfare into something much more dangerous. "He's having me watched," she said. Marcus stood immediately, moving to his laptop and beginning to shut down the files. "Then you need to leave. If Richard's surveillance captures you here with this evidence." "What? What would he do?" Marcus met her eyes, and she saw fear there, not for himself, but for her. "Alicia, your husband has made people disappear before. Environmental activists who threatened his construction projects. Government inspectors who asked too many questions. I have documentation of at least 3 suspicious accidents." The words hit her like a physical blow. Richard, the man who held her gently at night, who rubbed her feet when she was tired from hospital shifts, who'd cried when she told him about the pregnancy. That same man was capable of murder? "You're lying." "I wish I was." Marcus pulled up another file, showing her newspaper clippings about industrial accidents, car crashes, a house fire that killed a federal investigator who'd been looking into Callahan Enterprises. Richard doesn't just destroy businesses, Alicia. He destroys threats. Her phone rang, Richard's name appearing on the screen like a death sentence. Don't answer it, Marcus warned, but Alicia was already accepting the call. Richard, Alicia. His voice was deadly calm. I'm in the elevator of Marcus's building. I think it's time we all had a conversation. The line went dead, and Alicia stared at the phone in horror. Richard was coming up to Marcus's penthouse, and she was trapped between two men who'd both lied to her, both used her, both claimed to love her while preparing to destroy each other. Richard's confession hung between them like a blade. Everything I did, every corner I cut, every law I bent, it was to build something worthy of you. But Alicia's response shattered his world. And what if one of these babies isn't yours? Was it all worth it then? In 30 seconds, the elevator would arrive, and 3 people who destroyed each other's lives would finally face the truth about love, loyalty, and the price of keeping secrets. The paternity test results arrived like a verdict that would determine not just fatherhood, but the future of 2 empires built on lies. The medical envelope lay unopened on their marble dining table like a grenade with the pin pulled, while Atlanta's morning sun streamed through their penthouse windows, illuminating a scene that would either destroy them or forge them stronger. Richard sat across from Alicia, his hands steady despite the storm raging in his chest, while she pressed her palms against her growing belly as if she could protect the babies from whatever truth waited inside that envelope. Before we open this, Richard said quietly, there's something you need to understand. Whatever these results say, those are our children. Both of them. I've spent the last week destroying Marcus Webb's life, and I'd do it again to protect what's ours. Alicia's eyes filled with tears. Even if one of them isn't biologically yours? Especially then. Richard reached across the table, covering her hands with his. A child doesn't choose their biological father, Alicia. But they do deserve a father who chooses them. The words should have brought relief, but Alicia could only think about the evidence she'd seen in Marcus's penthouse, the files that painted Richard as a criminal who'd built his empire on fraud and violence. How could she let him raise children when she wasn't sure who he really was? Richard, there's something I need to tell you about Marcus, about why he... I know. Richard's interruption was gentle but firm. I know he's been building a case against me for 3 years. I know he seduced you to gather evidence about my business practices. I know he's planning to testify to the FBI in exchange for immunity. The confession hit her like cold water. You knew? This whole time, you knew what he was doing. I suspected. Marcus Webb doesn't do anything without a strategic purpose. When my investigators told me about your affair, the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Richard's thumb traced patterns on her knuckles. What I didn't know was how much information you'd inadvertently given him. Shame flooded through Alicia's system. I told him everything. Every stress you shared with me. Every concern about contracts and deadlines. I thought I was just talking to a friend about my husband's work pressure. And he used those conversations to cost me $200 million in contracts and position himself to destroy everything I've built. Richard's voice held no accusation, just tired acceptance. You were lonely, Marcus was charming, and I was too focused on building our future to notice I was losing our present. Are you going to kill him? The question came out before Alicia could stop herself, and Richard's entire body went still. When he looked at her, she saw something that terrified her more than anger, complete emotional emptiness. Is that what he told you? That I'm some kind of monster who eliminates threats? He showed me files, documentation of accidents involving people who threatened your business. Environmental activists, government inspectors, competitors who got too close to exposing. She couldn't finish the sentence. Exposing what, Alicia? The bribes, the falsified reports, the offshore accounts. The words tumbled out like a confession. Marcus has evidence that you've been stealing government contracts for years, Richard. Hundreds of millions in taxpayer money. Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity that had made him Atlanta's most feared negotiator. When he spoke, His voice carried the weight of a man laying down his weapons. Some of it's true. The admission hit her like a physical blow. How much? Enough. Richard stood, moving to the window, overlooking the city he'd conquered through questionable means. The offshore accounts exist. Some reports were altered. Money changed hands to secure contracts that my company deserved based on merit, but couldn't win through legitimate channels alone. Richard, I never killed anyone, Alicia, but I did destroy people who threatened what I was building. Careers, businesses, reputations. I eliminated obstacles without considering the human cost. He turned back to face her, and she saw the man she'd fallen in love with underneath the corporate predator. I told myself it was necessary, that I was building something that would benefit everyone in the long run. Could you love and raise a child that represents your partner's betrayal? What does it truly mean to be a father or mother beyond genetics? Why? She whispered. You're brilliant, talented, capable of succeeding legitimately. Why risk everything for shortcuts? Richard returned to his chair, his movements heavy with exhaustion. Because I was terrified of losing you. The answer came so quietly she almost missed it. When I met you at that medical conference, you were so far out of my league I couldn't breathe. Intelligent, beautiful, dedicated to helping others. Everything I wanted to be worthy of. You could have chosen any man in that room, but somehow you said yes to dinner. Richard, let me finish. His voice cracked slightly. You grew up poor, fighting for everything you achieved. You understood struggle, sacrifice, the value of honest work. I grew up wealthy, but empty, inheriting money instead of earning respect. When you agreed to marry me, I was determined to build something impressive enough to keep you interested. The truth unfolded between them like a wound being cleaned. Richard's crimes weren't motivated by greed. They were motivated by insecurity, by the desperate need to prove himself worthy of a woman who'd already chosen him for who he was underneath all the wealth and power. The faster I built the empire, the more corners I cut to speed the process. Each success required bigger risks, more questionable decisions. By the time I realized I was in too deep, stopping would have meant losing everything I'd built to impress you. Alicia felt tears streaming down her cheeks. I never needed you to impress me, Richard. I fell in love with a man who listened to my ideas about healthcare reform, who treated service workers with respect, who cried during the movie about the disabled veteran. But you married the billionaire. I married the man who made me feel seen. She moved around the table, taking his face in her hands. The money was never why I stayed, Richard. I stayed because you made me feel like the most important person in your world. Until I started treating you like another beautiful possession instead of the woman I'd die to protect. The confession broke something open between them. Years of miscommunication and misplaced priorities finally exposed. Richard had committed crimes to build an empire worthy of her love, while Alicia had betrayed him with Marcus because she felt invisible in the shadow of that same empire. Open the results, she said quietly. Richard picked up the envelope, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Whatever these tests revealed would determine custody arrangements, inheritance rights, and the emotional future of their family. He opened the envelope and read in silence, his face revealing nothing. Finally, he looked up, and Alicia saw tears in his eyes. Twin A shares my DNA. Twin B is Marcus's child. The words settled between them like stones. One baby would grow up as Richard's biological son or daughter. The other would be a daily reminder of Alicia's betrayal and Marcus's manipulation. I meant what I said, Richard continued, his voice strong despite the tears. Both children are ours. The one who shares my genetics and the one who doesn't. They're both Callahans, both our responsibility, both deserving of our love. Alicia collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest as the weight of months of secrets finally lifted. I'm so sorry, Richard, for the affair, for giving Marcus information about your work, for everything that led us here. Richard held her tightly, his own tears falling into her hair. We both made choices that brought us to this moment. But we're here now, together, and we're going to figure out how to move forward. What about Marcus? The FBI investigation. Richard was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her back with the gentleness that at first made her fall in love with him. Marcus has evidence that could send me to prison for 20 years. But he also has something else, a biological connection to one of our children that makes him family, whether we like it or not. What are you saying? She begged the lawyer not to tell her billionaire CEO husband what the doctor saw in her ultrasound. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Michael Turner's name appeared on the screen. Richard's lawyer, the man who'd helped them navigate the complicated world of prenups and corporate liability when they married 2 years ago. The man who'd become her friend during those difficult early months when Atlanta's high society treated her like an outsider. Have you ever held information that could destroy someone you love? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The ultrasound technician's face went white when she saw what appeared on the screen, and Alicia knew her billionaire husband's empire was about to crumble. 2 heartbeats, 2 different fathers, one devastating secret that could destroy everything she'd built. The twins growing inside her carried DNA that would expose not just her infidelity, but a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Richard's tech empire. What would you do if a medical scan revealed your darkest secret? Have you ever felt trapped between love and survival? Between truth and protection? Alicia faced an impossible choice: confess and lose everything, or hide the truth and risk destroying the man she loves. But what she discovered next would change everything about betrayal, loyalty, and the price of keeping secrets. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. She stared at the ultrasound photo like it was a death sentence, because in Richard Callahan's world, it might as well have been. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, each drop like bullets against glass. While Alicia pressed her back against the marble kitchen island, the ultrasound photo trembling in her hands. The storm outside Atlanta matched the chaos inside her chest. Wild, destructive, and completely out of control. 3 hours ago, she'd been a happy pregnant wife. Now, she was a woman holding evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in Georgia. The technician's words echoed in her head. Mrs. Callahan, we need to run additional tests. There are some irregularities we need to discuss with you privately. But Alicia already knew what those irregularities meant. She'd known the moment she saw 2 distinct heartbeats on that screen, 2 babies growing inside her, conceived weeks apart. Richard was supposed to be in Boston until Friday. His tech company was finalizing a government contract worth $200 million, the kind of deal that required his personal attention and legendary negotiating skills. She'd kissed him goodbye Tuesday morning, watched his black Mercedes disappear down Peachtree Street, and felt relief that she'd have time to process the pregnancy alone. Instead, she discovered something that made her question everything about their perfect life. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Michael Turner's name appeared on the screen. Richard's lawyer, the man who'd helped them navigate the complicated world of prenups and corporate liability when they married 2 years ago. The man who'd become her friend during those difficult early months when Atlanta's high society treated her like an outsider. Michael, she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Alicia, we need to meet tonight. There's something about the paternity test you don't know. Her blood turned to ice. What paternity test? I haven't taken any. The preliminary blood work from your appointment today. The doctor was required to run genetic screening for high-risk pregnancies. Alicia, the results. His voice trailed off, and she heard papers shuffling in the background. We need to talk in person. Through the rain-soaked windows, Atlanta's skyline blurred into watercolor streaks of light. Somewhere out there, Richard was building his empire, making deals that would secure their future. And here she stood, holding a secret that could tear it all down. Her hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. 6 weeks pregnant with twins. She should be planning nurseries and picking names. Instead, she was calculating how much truth would destroy the man she loved. The penthouse felt enormous around her, all white marble and clean lines, the kind of space that belonged in architectural magazines. When Richard first brought her here, She'd felt like a fraud walking through rooms that cost more than her mother's house in Detroit. Now, surrounded by luxury that money couldn't protect her from the truth, she felt small and terrified. Lightning illuminated the city below, and for one brilliant second, she could see everything clearly. The hospital where she'd gotten the news, the law office where Michael waited with answers she wasn't sure she wanted, the corporate tower where Richard's name gleamed in gold letters 40 stories above the street. Have you ever held information that could destroy someone you love? What would you sacrifice to protect them from the truth? Her reflection stared back from the dark windows. A young woman who'd grown up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, but somehow found herself living in Atlanta's most exclusive address. She'd met Richard at a medical conference where she was representing her hospital's nursing staff. He'd been the keynote speaker, talking about how technology could revolutionize healthcare access in underserved communities. After his speech, he found her by the coffee station, asked her opinion about urban healthcare challenges, and actually listened to her answers. Most wealthy men treated nurses like decoration, but Richard saw her mind first, her beauty second. When he asked her to dinner, she'd said yes, because he made her feel seen. Now, staring at the ultrasound photo, she wondered if being seen was worth the price they were about to pay. Michael's voice was steady on the phone. "Alicia, we need to meet tonight. There's something about the paternity test you don't know." But before she could respond, she heard Richard's key in the lock. He was home 3 days early. The front door opened with the soft click of expensive locks, and she heard Richard's footsteps on the marble entry floor. He moved through their home with the confidence of a man who owned everything he touched, including her heart. "Alicia," his voice carried through the penthouse, warm and familiar. "I saw the storm and caught an earlier flight. Didn't want you here alone." She slipped the ultrasound photo into her purse and tried to steady her breathing. In 30 seconds, he'd walk into this kitchen, kiss her hello, and ask about her day. What could she possibly say? The footsteps grew closer. Thunder rolled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, her phone buzzed with another message from Michael. The investigator found something. "We're in trouble." The man who built an empire on trust was about to discover that the two people closest to him had been keeping the most dangerous secret of all. Richard moved through their penthouse like a predator sensing prey, his designer suit still crisp despite the late hour, dark eyes scanning everything with the same intensity that had built his tech empire. He'd made his fortune reading people, spotting lies before they fully formed, and tonight something in the air made his instincts scream danger. "You're pale," he said, studying Alicia's face as she stood by the kitchen island. His hands found her shoulders, strong fingers kneading the tension there. "Bad day at the hospital?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Richard's touch usually calmed her, but tonight it felt like being examined under a microscope. He had this way of looking at people that made them confess things they'd never intended to share, a skill that made him brilliant in boardrooms and terrifying in personal relationships. "Just tired," she managed. The night shift was brutal, but Richard wasn't buying it. He'd built Callahan Enterprises by trusting his gut, and right now his gut was telling him that his wife was lying. The woman who'd never hidden anything from him, who answered his questions with the directness that had first attracted him, was now avoiding his eyes. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "Package delivered to your office as requested. Recommend immediate review." Richard had requested background checks on everyone in Alicia's life, not out of jealousy, but because wealthy men made enemies, and enemies often targeted what they loved most. The report on her hospital colleagues, her friend from Detroit, even her grocery store clerk, should be waiting on his desk downtown. What he hadn't expected was to feel like he needed to investigate his own wife. "Come here," he murmured, pulling her against his chest. She fit perfectly there, her head tucked under his chin, and for a moment the world made sense again. This was his wife, the woman who'd chosen him not for his money, but for who he was underneath all the power and wealth. The woman who still worked 12-hour shifts at Atlanta General because she believed in serving others, even though she never had to work again. But her body was rigid against his, and when he tilted her face up to kiss her, her lips trembled. Alicia, what's wrong? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. Michael Turner's name lit up the screen, and Richard's entire body went still. Michael texting Alicia at nearly midnight wasn't unusual. The lawyer often worked late, and he'd become a friend to both of them. But the way Alicia lunged for the phone, the panic that flashed across her face, made Richard's blood run cold. "Don't," she whispered, but he'd already seen the message preview. "The investigator found something. We're in trouble." Richard stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. In the space of 3 words, his perfect world shifted on its axis. Michael was investigating something. Something that involved Alicia. Something that put them in trouble. What investigator? His voice came out deadly quiet, the tone that made corporate rivals surrender before negotiations even began. Alicia's mouth opened and closed like she was drowning. The phone buzzed again. Richard's asking questions. "We need to meet now." This time, Richard was fast enough to read the full message. His wife and his lawyer were meeting secretly. His wife and his lawyer were afraid of questions he was asking. His wife and his lawyer were in some kind of trouble that required investigators. The penthouse suddenly felt like a crime scene. Alicia. He said her name like a judge pronouncing sentence. What? Investigator. She pressed her back against the kitchen island, trapped between marble and the man she'd married. Richard had never looked at her with that expression before. Cold calculation replacing the warmth she'd grown to depend on. This was the face he showed to business enemies, to people who tried to steal from him or betray his trust. She'd never imagined seeing it directed at her. When someone you trust starts acting differently, do you confront them or investigate quietly? Tell me how you'd handle sudden changes in someone close to you. Richard, please just listen. No. He held up one hand, and she fell silent. You're going to tell me why my lawyer is texting my wife about investigators and trouble at midnight. You're going to tell me right now. The storm outside seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. Lightning illuminated the penthouse in stark black and white, and in that moment of clarity, Alicia realized she had 2 choices: confess everything and watch their world explode, or lie to the man who'd built his entire life on being able to spot deception. Neither choice would save her. Richard's phone rang, cutting through the tension like a blade. The caller ID made Alicia's knees weak. Private investigator, urgent. Don't answer it, she pleaded. But Richard was already swiping to accept the call. Callahan. Mr. Callahan, this is Detective Morrison with Morrison Investigations. You asked me to run background checks on individuals in your wife's circle. Sir, we've discovered some information that requires immediate discussion. Richard's eyes never left Alicia's face as he listened. Whatever the detective was saying made his jaw clench, his free hand curl into a fist. How long? Richard asked. The incident occurred during your business trip to London 3 months ago. We have photographic evidence, credit card receipts, hotel records. Enough. Richard ended the call and set his phone on the counter with surgical precision. When he looked at Alicia again, she saw something die in his eyes. 3 months ago, London trip, while I was negotiating the Morrison Industries deal, working 18-hour days to secure our future. She opened her mouth to explain, to defend herself, but he held up his hand again. Who is he? 2 words. Simple question. But Alicia knew that her answer would determine whether their marriage survived the night. As Richard kissed her neck, whispering, I missed you, Alicia felt her phone buzz with a text from Michael. The investigator found something. We're in trouble. Richard's hands stilled on her waist. Who's texting you this late? Thunder crashed outside, and in the distance, sirens wailed through Atlanta's empty streets. Michael Turner had built his career defending the wealthy and powerful, but tonight he was about to betray the most dangerous man in Atlanta. The law office felt like a confessional booth, mahogany panels and leather chairs bearing witness to secrets that could topple empires, while the city lights below blinked like a heartbeat monitor. Michael loosened his tie, poured 3 fingers of whiskey, and stared at the file that would destroy his best client's marriage. He'd known Richard Callahan for 8 years, ever since representing him in his first major acquisition. Richard was the kind of client every lawyer dreamed of: brilliant, decisive, and wealthy enough to afford the best legal advice money could buy. More than that, he'd become a friend, someone Michael trusted with his own investments and family matters. Now Michael was about to stab him in the back. The elevator chimed, and Alicia stepped into his office looking like she'd been through hell. Her usually perfect hair was wild from the storm, her scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, and her eyes held the desperate look of someone trapped in their own lies. Michael, thank God. She collapsed into the leather chair across from his desk. Richard came home early. He knows something's wrong. His investigator called right in front of me. Michael's whiskey suddenly tasted like ash. What did the investigator tell him? Something about London. 3 months ago, he mentioned photographs and hotel records. Alicia's voice broke on the last words. Michael, what am I going to do? Michael opened the file on his desk, revealing photographs that made his stomach turn. Alicia leaving the downtown Marriott with Marcus Webb. Alicia in Marcus's penthouse, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Alicia's car parked outside Marcus's building for 6 hours while Richard was 5,000 miles away, working to secure their future. The investigator Richard hired is thorough, Michael said quietly. These photos were taken 3 months ago, during Richard's London negotiations. But Alicia, he pulled out another document, one she hadn't seen yet. The preliminary paternity results from your blood work today. One of the twins, the genetic markers don't match Richard. Alicia went pale. That's impossible. I mean, I know I was with Marcus, but we use protection. And Richard and I were trying to get pregnant. The timing suggests you conceive twins at different times. It's rare, but it happens. Superfetation, when a woman releases multiple eggs during different ovulation cycles and conceives with different partners. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Michael had been practicing family law for 15 years. He'd seen marriages destroyed by infidelity, custody battles that turned parents into enemies, and financial settlements that left everyone bitter and broken. But he'd never been personally invested in the outcome until now. Alicia wasn't just Richard's wife. She was Michael's friend, someone he'd counseled through the difficult transition into Atlanta's social scene. He'd watched Richard fall in love with her genuine heart, her refusal to be impressed by wealth, her dedication to helping others even after marrying a billionaire. And he'd also seen Marcus Webb destroy good people for sport. Alicia, you need to understand something about Marcus Webb. Michael pulled out another file, this one thick with corporate documents and legal filings. He's not just Richard's business rival. He's been systematically targeting Richard's interests for 2 years. The London deal Richard was working on? Marcus had been feeding insider information to Richard's competitors, trying to sabotage the negotiations. Alicia stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying that Marcus Webb seducing you while Richard was out of the country wasn't a coincidence. It was strategy. The words hit Alicia like physical blows. She'd been lonely during Richard's extended business trips, missing her husband, but understanding that building an empire required sacrifice. When she'd run into Marcus at the hospital charity gala, he'd seemed like exactly what she needed. Someone who listened to her concerns about Richard working too much, someone who understood how isolating wealth could be. Marcus had been charming, attentive, and completely focused on her in a way that made her feel special. When he'd invited her for coffee to discuss expanding charity programs, she'd said yes. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became late-night conversations about feeling disconnected from the man you love. And one night, when Richard had called to cancel their planned video date because of crisis negotiations, Marcus had been there with wine and sympathy. Have you ever been caught between loyalty to a friend and professional ethics? How do you choose between protecting someone and doing what's right? He planned it, she whispered. The whole time, he was using me to hurt Richard. That's what I believe. And if Richard finds out that Marcus not only seduced his wife, but might be the father of one of his children. Michael's voice trailed off. Richard won't just destroy Marcus financially. He'll destroy him completely, and you'll be caught in the crossfire. Alicia's hands moved to her stomach, where 2 lives were growing, one definitely Richard's, one possibly belonging to the man who'd used her as a weapon against her husband. Michael's desk phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the heavy silence. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. It's Richard. Before Michael could decide whether to answer, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Turner, Mr. Callahan is here to see you. He says it's urgent and he's not leaving without answers. Michael and Alicia stared at each other across the desk. Outside, Atlantis sparkled in the darkness. Millions of people living their quiet lives while 3 people in this office prepared to detonate a bomb that would destroy everything they'd built. What do we do? Alicia whispered. Michael looked at the files scattered across his desk. Evidence of betrayal, conspiracy, and a pregnancy that could start a war between 2 of Atlanta's most powerful men. He'd built his career on protecting his clients' interests, but tonight he had 2 clients whose interests were about to collide catastrophically. The office door opened, and Richard Callahan walked in like he owned the building. His presence filled the room, all controlled power and dangerous intelligence. When his eyes found Alicia sitting in the client chair, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or disappointment so deep it felt like betrayal. Michael, Richard said, his voice deadly calm. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. Michael's hand shook as he opened the DNA preliminary report. Alicia, one of these babies, the father isn't who you think it is. Before she could ask what he meant, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Turner, Mr. Callahan is here to see you. The storm outside intensified. Rain lashing against the windows like the city itself was weeping for what was about to be destroyed. Richard Callahan didn't knock. Men with this kind of power didn't need permission to enter any room. The office door swung open with the force of Richard's anger, his presence filling the room like smoke, suffocating and inescapable, while Alicia pressed herself deeper into the leather chair, as if it could swallow her whole. Michael stood behind his desk like a barrier between 2 forces about to collide, and for the first time in his legal career, he wasn't sure he could control the outcome. Richard's eyes swept the scene with the precision of a man trained to assess threats. Alicia in the client chair, looking guilty and terrified. Michael standing protectively nearby, files scattered across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. And between them, the suffocating weight of secrets that were about to explode. Cozy, Richard said, closing the door behind him with deliberate softness. My wife and my lawyer having midnight meetings about investigators and trouble. Should I be concerned? Michael cleared his throat, falling back on his legal training. Richard, perhaps we should schedule. No. Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. We're having this conversation now. Alicia, stand up. It wasn't a request. Alicia rose from her chair on unsteady legs, and Richard's gaze traveled over her with the intensity of a man cataloging every detail. She looked different tonight, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with guilt eating her alive. 3 months ago, Richard continued, his tone conversational but deadly. I spent 2 weeks in London negotiating the Morrison Industries deal. 18-hour days, sleeping 3 hours a night, working my ass off to secure a contract that would set us up for life. He paused, letting the words settle. While I was doing that, where were you? Alicia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Let me help you remember. Richard pulled out his phone, swiped to the photos his investigator had sent. The Marriott downtown. Marcus Webb's penthouse. That little wine bar on Peachtree where you used to say you wanted me to take you, but I was always too busy working. Each location hit Alicia like a physical blow. She'd thought those moments were private, secret, safely buried in the past. The idea that someone had been watching, documenting, turning her worst mistake into evidence, made her feel exposed and violated. Michael stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Richard, you're upset, and rightfully so, but upset. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michael, upset is when my stock drops 5 points. Upset is when a deal falls through. This, he gestured between himself and Alicia. This is betrayal. This is my wife fucking my biggest competitor while I was working to build our future. The crude words made Alicia flinch. Richard never spoke to her that way, never reduced their relationship to something ugly and transactional. But the man standing in Michael's office wasn't her husband. He was the CEO who'd crushed dozens of competitors, the strategist who turned every betrayal into ammunition. It wasn't like that, Alicia whispered. Then what was it like? Richard stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, see the exhaustion around his eyes from the flight home. Explain to me how my wife ended up in Marcus Webb's bed while I was 5,000 miles away, thinking about her every night. The pain in his voice was worse than anger. Alicia had expected rage, threats, maybe even violence. What she hadn't prepared for was seeing Richard Callahan, the most powerful man she'd ever met, look completely broken. He was kind to me, she said, the words sounding pathetic even to her own ears. You were working all the time, and I felt so alone. He listened when I talked about missing you, about feeling like I didn't belong in your world. And one night you decided to thank him with my wife's body. Michael intervened before the conversation could spiral further. Richard, sit down. Please. There's more to this situation than infidelity. Richard's gaze sharpened. More. Michael's hand moved to the DNA report, then stopped. Once he revealed this information, there would be no going back. Richard would know that his wife's betrayal might have created a child, a permanent reminder of her infidelity that would complicate every aspect of their lives. But before Michael could speak, Richard's phone rang. The caller ID made all three of them freeze. Private investigator, urgent. When confronted with betrayal, would you demand immediate answers or gather more evidence first? Share how you handle conflicts in relationships. Richard answered without taking his eyes off Alicia. Morrison, Mr. Callahan, I'm outside the Turner Law Building. You need to see what we found tonight. It's about Mrs. Callahan's medical appointment today, and, sir, it changes everything. What kind of changes? The kind that affects paternity, inheritance, and corporate liability. Sir, one of those babies might not be yours. The words hung in the air like a live grenade. Richard's face went completely still, and for a moment, the only sound in the office was the storm raging outside Atlanta's windows. Alicia felt her knees give out. She sank back into the chair, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other protectively covering her stomach. The baby she'd been so excited to tell Richard about, the future she'd imagined them building together, had just become weapons in a war she'd started. Richard ended the call without saying goodbye. When he looked at Michael, his expression was calm in the way that preceded total devastation. Show me the report. Richard, show me the report. Michael's hands shook as he slid the DNA preliminary results across the desk. Richard read in complete silence, his face revealing nothing. But Alicia saw his knuckles go white where he gripped the papers, saw the muscle in his jaw jump with tension. Finally, he looked up. Twins. Different fathers. One mine, one Marcus Webb's. His voice was completely flat, empty of emotion. My wife is carrying my child and my enemy's child simultaneously. The legal and financial implications started hitting him in waves. Inheritance rights, custody battles, corporate liability if Marcus tried to use his biological child as leverage, media coverage that would destroy both their reputations. A custody arrangement with the man who tried to destroy his business and succeeded in destroying his marriage. Richard, I know this is, Michael began. Richard held up one hand. How long have you known? The blood work results came in this afternoon. I called Alicia immediately. And neither of you thought to tell me that my wife was pregnant with another man's child. We were trying to figure out how. You were trying to figure out how to hide it from me. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. How to manage the situation. How to protect Alicia from the consequences of her choices. He stood slowly, straightening his tie with the careful precision of a man holding himself together through sheer willpower. When he looked at Alicia again, she saw something that terrified her more than anger. Complete emotional distance. I need some air, he said. When I come back, we're going to discuss how this gets handled. Lawyers, custody arrangements, financial settlements. All of it. He was almost at the door when Alicia found her voice. Richard, wait. Please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, shoulders rigid. For a moment, she thought he might turn around, might give her a chance to explain, to fight for their marriage. Instead, he spoke without looking back. Love doesn't do this, Alicia. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't lie. His voice broke slightly on the last word. Love doesn't get pregnant with another man's child. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. Richard's voice cut through the tension like ice. I know about the appointment. I know about the calls. What I don't know is why my wife and my lawyer think they can lie to me. As his phone rang, the caller ID made Alicia's blood freeze. Private investigator, urgent. Outside, Atlanta glittered in the darkness, completely unaware that in one office, 3 lives had just shattered beyond repair. The private investigator's report contained 3 words that would change everything. DNA results attached. The conference room at midnight felt like a courtroom where a verdict would determine not just guilt or innocence, but the fate of an empire built on a foundation that was crumbling with each turned page. Detective Morrison spread photographs across the polished table like playing cards in a game where everyone was about to lose. Richard sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone, while Alicia pressed herself into the corner chair as far from the evidence as possible. Michael stood by the windows, watching Atlanta sleep peacefully below, completely unaware that 3 of its most prominent citizens were about to destroy each other. Mrs. Callahan, Detective Morrison began, his voice professionally neutral. These photographs were taken over a 6-week period, starting 2 days after your husband left for London. The first photo showed Alicia leaving Atlanta General after her shift, looking tired but normal. The second showed her at Starbucks with Marcus Webb, both of them laughing over coffee cups. Innocent enough, except for the timestamp. 11:47 p.m., 3 days after Richard's departure. This escalated quickly. Morrison continued, sliding more photos across the table. Within a week, you were spending entire evenings at Mr. Webb's residence. Each photograph felt like a slap. Alicia remembered those nights. Marcus cooking dinner for her, listening to her talk about missing Richard, making her feel understood in ways her husband's busy schedule didn't allow. What she'd seen as emotional support, the camera had captured as a calculated seduction. Mr. Webb is known to our agency, Morrison said, glancing at Richard. We've investigated him for 3 other clients. His pattern is consistent. He targets wives of successful businessmen, usually during extended business trips. The goal isn't romance. It's leverage. Richard's voice came out deadly quiet. Leverage for what? Morrison pulled out a thick folder. Corporate espionage. Industrial secrets. In 2 previous cases, information obtained through these relationships cost his targets millions in lost contracts. In one case, a man lost his entire company. The room went completely silent except for the storm still raging outside. Alicia felt like she was drowning. Everything she believed about those nights with Marcus, his genuine interest in her feelings, his understanding of her loneliness, his gentle seduction that made her feel desired rather than used, had been a performance. A business strategy designed to destroy her husband. The London deal, Richard said, pieces clicking into place. Webb knew exactly which companies I was negotiating with. He knew our offer terms before I finalized them. Mrs. Callahan, Morrison addressed her directly. During your conversations with Mr. Webb, did you discuss your husband's business activities? Travel schedule? Any details about his work? Alicia's blood turned to ice as she remembered those intimate dinners. Marcus asking about Richard's stress levels, his long hours, which countries he was visiting. She thought he was being caring, showing interest in her life. Instead, he'd been mining her for intelligence. Oh God, she whispered. I told him everything. When Richard would call me upset about negotiations, I'd talk to Marcus about it. I thought he was helping me understand why my husband was working so much. Have you ever discovered that someone's past held secrets that changed everything you thought you knew about them? How did you handle that revelation? Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the windows, looking out at the city he'd spent years conquering, now knowing that his greatest enemy had been sleeping in his bed. How much? He asked without turning around. "Sir, how much did my wife's pillow talk cost me?" Morrison consulted his notes. "The London deal fell through when your competitors undercut your final offer by exactly 12%. Industry insiders say that level of precision suggests someone had access to your negotiation strategy. The contract was worth $200 million. $200 million. Lost because Alicia had needed someone to talk to during lonely nights." But Morrison wasn't finished. "There's more, Mr. Callahan. The pregnancy timing is unusual. According to medical records, Mrs. Callahan conceived twins approximately 2 weeks apart. The first conception aligns with your return from a brief trip to Miami. The second," he glanced at his notes. "The second occurred during a weekend when you were in New York for the Morrison Industries board meeting." Richard turned from the window, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You're telling me that my wife conceived my child, then 2 weeks later conceived Marcus Webb's child, during a weekend when I was working to secure our future? That's what the genetic markers suggest, yes. The scientific impossibility of it would have been fascinating under different circumstances. Superfetation, a rare condition where a woman continues to ovulate and can conceive additional children even after becoming pregnant. It happened in less than 1% of twin pregnancies, usually when the woman was under extreme stress or hormonal changes. Alicia had been under stress, missing Richard, feeling isolated in their wealthy world, vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation. Her body had betrayed her as completely as her heart had. "The weekend you were in New York," Alicia said quietly, "I felt so sick. I thought it was just missing you. Marcus brought me soup, stayed to make sure I was okay. And while I was in board meetings that weekend, working 18-hour days to close the Morrison deal, you were with him." Richard's voice could have frozen fire, not just emotionally, physically, creating a child. Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Callahan, there's one more thing. Mr. Webb has been asking questions about Mrs. Callahan's pregnancy. He's hired his own investigator." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "He knows," Alicia whispered. "He knows about the twins. He knows about the different conception dates. And based on his recent financial moves, liquidating assets, moving money offshore, he's preparing for either a custody battle or a corporate takeover attempt." Richard returned to his chair, his movements precise and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold calculation that had made him Atlanta's most feared negotiator. "Marcus Webb seduced my wife to steal corporate secrets. Cost me $200 million in lost contracts. And now he's positioning himself to use his biological child as leverage against me for the rest of my life." He looked at Alicia with an expression she'd never seen before. Not love, not anger, but the cold assessment of a general studying enemy positions. "You didn't just cheat, Alicia. You handed our greatest enemy a permanent weapon to use against us, against our family, against everything I've built." The truth hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about corporate warfare, custody battles, and a child who would grow up as a pawn in a game between two powerful men who despised each other. "What do we do?" she whispered. Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs scattered across the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd just declared war. "We prepare for battle. Marcus Webb wants to play games with my family. He's about to learn why I don't lose." The investigator's final photo showed Alicia leaving Marcus Webb's downtown loft just hours before she called Richard in London to tell him she loved him. But the timestamp revealed something that made Richard's hands shake. She was already pregnant when she slept with Marcus. She'd been carrying Richard's child when she betrayed him with his greatest enemy. The ultimate violation, using their unborn baby as cover for her infidelity. Thunder crashed outside, shaking the windows of the conference room, as if the storm itself was reacting to the devastation inside. In the distance, sirens wailed through Atlanta's empty streets, and Detective Morrison quietly gathered his evidence, knowing he'd just witnessed the beginning of a war that would consume everyone it touched. Richard stood slowly, his decision made. "Morrison, I want everything you have on Marcus Webb. Every bank account, every business deal, every relationship. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and who he calls when he can't sleep. He turned to Michael, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor. Start preparing custody documents, prenups, divorce papers if necessary. I want every legal option available. Finally, he looked at Alicia, and she saw something that terrified her more than his anger. Complete emotional shutdown. The man who'd once looked at her like she was his entire world now studied her like a problem to be solved. And you, he said quietly, you're going to help me destroy the man who used you to destroy us. Because whether you realize it or not, Alicia, we're fighting for the future of both these children now. And I don't intend to lose. The storm outside began to calm, but inside the conference room, the real tempest was just beginning. Marcus Webb had stolen Richard's biggest client, his government contract, and now possibly his child, but he had no idea the war he'd just started. The chrome elevator climbed toward Marcus's penthouse like a rocket carrying Alicia toward her destruction, each floor bringing her closer to the decision that would tear her world apart. 3 months ago, she'd felt justified, even righteous in her anger at Richard's constant absence. Tonight, surrounded by the evidence of Marcus's calculated seduction, she felt like a fool who'd handed her enemy the keys to her husband's kingdom. Marcus's penthouse overlooked the same Atlanta skyline as Richard's, but where Richard's space was all clean lines and controlled power, Marcus's felt dangerous, full of shadows and secrets waiting to devour the unwary. The city lights twinkled 40 stories below, and Alicia remembered how impressed she'd been the first time he'd brought her here. How naive she'd been then, thinking his interest in her was genuine. The penthouse door opened before she could knock, and Marcus Webb stood there like he'd been waiting for her arrival. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of dangerous smile that made women forget they were married, he looked exactly like the predator Richard's investigator had described. But 3 months ago, when Richard was in London working 18-hour days, Marcus had seemed like salvation. "Alicia," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "You look upset. Richard giving you trouble again?" The casual way he dismissed her husband, the man she loved, the father of at least one of her children, made her sick. How had she ever found this attractive? "You used me." The words came out flat, emotionless. Everything between us was a lie. Marcus closed the door, his movements unhurried. He wore dark jeans and a white shirt that probably cost more than most people's rent, his wealth displayed with the same casual arrogance that had once made Alicia feel special. Now she saw it for what it was, another weapon in his war against Richard. "Used you?" He poured himself a drink from the bar that dominated one wall of the living room. "Alicia, what we had was real. The most real thing in your life, if I'm being honest." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who'd held her while she cried about missing Richard, who'd listened to her fears about not fitting into Atlanta's wealthy society, who'd made her feel understood when her own husband was too busy building his empire to notice her loneliness. Richard's investigator has photos. Marcus. Dates, times, conversations. You planned this from the beginning. Marcus sipped his whiskey, studying her over the rim of his glass. Richard's investigator is thorough. I'll give him that. But tell me something. When you came to me that first night, upset because your husband had canceled another dinner for another business crisis, did it feel planned? When I held you and told you that you deserved better than a man who puts deals before his wife, did that feel like strategy? The memories hit her like physical blows. That first night at the charity event, when Richard had called to say he couldn't make it because of urgent negotiations. Marcus finding her crying in the bathroom, offering his handkerchief and a sympathetic ear. The way he'd listen when she talked about feeling invisible in her own marriage. You were lonely. Marcus continued, moving closer. Richard was treating you like a beautiful accessory instead of a woman with needs and feelings. I gave you what he couldn't: attention, understanding, passion. You gave me lies. But even as she said it, Alicia remembered the way Marcus had touched her, like she was precious, desired, worth his complete focus. Richard's touch was possessive, claiming, but Marcus had made her feel worshipped. Did I lie when I told you that you were beautiful? When I said you deserve a man who put you first? Marcus set down his glass and reached for her, his fingers tracing her cheek with the same gentleness that had undone her 3 months ago. Did I lie when I made you feel like the most important person in my world? Alicia closed her eyes, remembering that first kiss in his car after dinner, the way he'd asked permission before touching her, the careful way he'd undressed her like she was something sacred. Richard took her with the confidence of ownership, but Marcus had seduced her with reverence. Have you ever made a decision in a moment of loneliness that changed your entire life? What drives people to betray those they love most? The London contract, she whispered. You knew exactly what to ask me. You knew which questions would make me talk about Richard's work. Marcus's hand stilled on her face. I knew Richard was vulnerable. He'd been making enemies with his aggressive business tactics, cutting corners that would eventually catch up with him. The London deal was just the beginning. So you decided to use his wife to destroy him? I decided to show his wife that she had other options. Marcus's voice dropped to the intimate tone that had once made her pulse race. Richard Callahan thinks he owns everything he touches. Companies, contracts, people. He married you like you were another acquisition, Alicia. Something beautiful to display at corporate events. The words stung because they held enough truth to cut deep. Richard did introduce her as his wife before her name, did expect her to play the role of the perfect corporate spouse, did sometimes treat their relationship like another successful merger. But I see you, Marcus continued, his thumb stroking across her lower lip. I see the intelligent woman who grew up fighting for everything she had. The nurse who chose to keep working because helping people matters to you. The woman who married a billionaire but still shops at Target because you remember what it's like to count every dollar. He knew her. Despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation, Marcus Webb had taken the time to truly see her in ways that Richard sometimes missed in his rush to conquer the business world. When you called me that night, crying because Richard had missed another dinner, another promise to spend time with you, I didn't have to pretend to care. I did care. I still do. Marcus pulled her against him, and for one dangerous moment, Alicia let herself remember how it felt to be the center of someone's attention, to be desired rather than possessed, to be seen as more than just an extension of her husband's success. His lips brushed her ear as he whispered, "Tell me you didn't feel anything real between us. Tell me it was all in my imagination." She couldn't. Whatever else Marcus had lied about, the connection between them had been real. The way he'd made her laugh during those long dinners when Richard was working late. The way he'd held her after they made love, talking about books and dreams and the parts of herself she'd lost in the marble halls of wealth. The way he'd made her feel like a woman instead of just a wife. It doesn't matter what I felt, she said, pulling away from his touch. You're using our child as a weapon against Richard. That makes you a monster, regardless of whatever we had. Marcus's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Our child. The paternity tests came back. One of the twins is yours. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus stepped backward, his face going pale, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked genuinely shaken. A child, he whispered. My child. A child you're already planning to use as leverage against Richard. Don't try to deny it. I know you've been asking questions about the pregnancy, moving money offshore. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, the calculated seducer replaced by a man confronting the reality of fatherhood. I wanted options. If the child was mine, I needed to be prepared for Richard's retaliation. He's not exactly known for his mercy toward people who cross him. So you were planning to what? Take the baby? Use custody as a way to hurt Richard. I was planning to protect my child from becoming a casualty in Richard's war against me. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Do you think he's going to love a baby that represents your betrayal? Do you think he's going to treat my son or daughter the same as his own? The question hit her like a slap because she'd wondered the same thing. Richard had pledged to love both children, but how could any man look at the physical proof of his wife's infidelity and not feel resentment? Richard is a better man than you think. Richard is a man who destroys his enemies completely. And now, thanks to what happened between us, your child is his enemy's son. How do you think that's going to work out for a kid who grows up knowing his father tried to destroy the only dad he's ever known? Marcus moved to the window, staring out at Atlanta's skyline. I never wanted children, Alicia. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding that responsibility. But knowing there's a baby out there with my DNA. He turned back to her, and she saw something she'd never expected. Fear. I can't let Richard raise my child to hate me. Then don't give him a reason to. It's too late for that. The damage is done. Richard will never forgive either of us, and your child will grow up caught between two men who despise each other. As Marcus traced patterns on Alicia's skin, he whispered words that made her blood run cold. Richard doesn't deserve you. When this is all over, you'll see that I'm the one who truly understands your worth. She realized then that her moment of weakness wasn't random. It was planned. But standing in his penthouse now, Alicia saw something that changed everything. In Marcus's eyes, she glimpsed not just the calculating businessman, but a man terrified of becoming a father under impossible circumstances. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to save them all. Richard Callahan had built his empire by destroying enemies. Tonight, he discovered his greatest enemy had been sleeping in his bed. The boardroom at Callahan Enterprises transformed into a war room. Screens displaying financial data, legal documents, and surveillance photos like battle plans against an enemy who had made the fatal mistake of making it personal. Richard stood at the head of the polished conference table, his navy suit impeccable despite the late hour, while his team of lawyers and investigators waited for orders that would reshape Atlanta's business landscape. "Gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the cold precision that had made him Georgia's most feared negotiator. "Marcus Webb declared war the moment he touched my wife. Now we're going to show him what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." The assembled team, 5 of Atlanta's most expensive lawyers, 2 private investigators, and his head of corporate security, leaned forward like predators sensing blood. These were the men who'd helped Richard build his empire, who'd learned that their boss never fought fair when someone threatened what belonged to him. Michael Turner sat at Richard's right hand, his face pale with the knowledge of what was coming. He'd seen Richard destroy business rivals before, but never with this level of personal fury driving his strategic mind. The combination was terrifying. "Financial status report," Richard commanded. His chief financial officer opened a tablet, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Webb Industries has $17 million in liquid assets, but they're highly leveraged. 3 major loans coming due in the next 6 months. If we coordinate with the right lenders, we can force a liquidity crisis. Do it." Richard's response came without hesitation. "Next." The senior investigator cleared his throat. "Webb's been moving money offshore, but we've tracked the accounts. He's also been liquidating investments, which suggests he's preparing for either a custody battle or an extended legal fight." "He's preparing for both," Richard said grimly. "What about the corporate espionage angle?" "We have documented evidence that information from your London negotiations was leaked to 3 separate competitors. The timing correlates directly with Webb's relationship with Mrs. Callahan. We can prove corporate espionage and conspiracy." Richard's jaw clenched as he processed the implications. Marcus hadn't just seduced his wife. He turned her into an unwitting accomplice in corporate theft. Every intimate conversation Alicia had shared about Richard's stress, his long hours, his difficult negotiations, had been intelligence that Marcus used to undermine $200 million in contracts. Criminal charges? Federal prosecutors are interested. Corporate espionage at this level could mean 10 years minimum. Richard walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. The city he'd spent 15 years conquering spread out below him like a chessboard where he controlled most of the pieces. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was probably sleeping peacefully, unaware that his world was about to collapse. But destroying Marcus wouldn't heal the wound in Richard's chest, wouldn't erase the image of his wife in another man's arms, wouldn't change the fact that one of his children shared DNA with the man who tried to destroy everything Richard had built. His phone buzzed with a text from Alicia. "I want to see Marcus tonight. We need to talk." The message sent ice through Richard's veins. His wife was still meeting with her lover, still trying to manage a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. Did she think she could negotiate peace between two men who'd moved past the possibility of coexistence? Sir, Michael's voice cut through Richard's dark thoughts. What are your orders? Richard turned from the window, his decision crystallizing with the cold clarity that had made him Atlanta's most successful businessman. Full financial war. I want Webb Industries destroyed by Christmas. Seize his assets, call in his loans, freeze his offshore accounts. Make it impossible for him to fund a custody battle. And the criminal charges? File everything. Corporate espionage, conspiracy, fraud. Every charge that will stick. I want him in federal prison before my children are old enough to remember his name. The room buzzed with activity as his team began implementing orders that would systematically dismantle Marcus Webb's life. But Richard felt no satisfaction in the coming victory. Revenge wouldn't restore his trust in Alicia, wouldn't make him forget that his wife had chosen another man's bed during his absence. When confronted with betrayal, would you demand immediate answers or gather more evidence first? Share how you handle conflicts in relationships. His phone rang, interrupting the strategy session. Alicia's name on the caller ID made everyone in the room go silent. Richard, please come home. I have something to tell you about Marcus, about the babies, about everything. You need to hear this before you do something we'll all regret. Her voice carried a desperation that might have moved him a week ago. Now it just sounded like another manipulation, another attempt to protect her lover from the consequences of their betrayal. I'm busy, he said coldly. Richard, Marcus isn't what we thought. There's more to this situation, things that change everything. If you love me, if you love these babies, please just come home and listen. The plea in her voice almost broke his resolve. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, the nurse from Detroit who'd seen past his wealth to the man underneath. The woman who'd made him believe in something deeper than corporate success. But it was also the woman who'd shared his bed with his greatest enemy. I'll be home when I'm finished here, he said, ending the call. Michael looked uncomfortable. Richard, maybe you should hear what she has to say before. Before what? Before I protect my family from a man who used my wife to steal corporate secrets? Before I make sure Marcus Webb never has the resources to fight me for custody of my child? Before you do something that makes reconciliation impossible? Richard's laugh held no humor. Reconciliation? Michael, my wife conceived another man's child while I was working to secure our future. She turned our private conversations into intelligence that cost me $200 million. What exactly should I be reconciling? The truth was, Richard wanted to reconcile. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and lies and humiliation, he still loved Alicia with a desperate intensity that had made him pursue her across Detroit's medical conferences, that had made him build their life around keeping her happy. But love wasn't enough to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be repaired with good intentions. His head of security cleared his throat. Sir, there's something else. Webb's penthouse security shows Mrs. Callahan arriving an hour ago. She left 20 minutes later, but he paused, consulting his tablet. She looked upset, crying. The image of Alicia crying in Marcus's penthouse sent fury through Richard's system like poison. Even now, even after everything had been exposed, she was still seeking comfort from the man who'd used her to attack her husband. Double our efforts, Richard commanded. I want Marcus Webb destroyed by morning. As his team dispersed to implement his orders, Richard remained alone in the boardroom, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal and his enemy's manipulation. Through the windows, Atlanta glittered with the promise of tomorrow, but Richard could only see the wreckage of the life he'd built. His phone buzzed with another message from Alicia. Marcus told me something about you, about your business. We need to talk before the FBI gets involved. FBI. The word hit Richard like a physical blow. If federal investigators were looking into his business practices, Marcus had done more than steal contracts. He'd opened a door that could destroy everything Richard had built. I'm saying that destroying Marcus won't protect our children from the truth about their parentage. And if I go to prison, both babies lose the only father they've ever known. Richard pulled back to meet her eyes. Maybe it's time to stop fighting and start finding a solution that protects everyone we love. The possibility hung between them, like hope wrapped in fear. Could three people who destroyed each other's lives find a way to coexist for the sake of the children caught in the middle? Richard held the results against his chest, eyes closed. Whatever this says, those are our children. But before we open this, you need to know, Marcus made me an offer. He'll disappear forever and never claim parental rights, but only if I give him something that will destroy innocent people. Alicia's hand covered her growing belly. What kind of offer? Outside their penthouse windows, Atlantis sparkled in the morning sun, oblivious to the fact that three lives had just found a path toward redemption, if they were brave enough to take it. Marcus Webb's final offer came with a price that would save their family, but damn their souls. The warehouse meeting felt like a scene from a thriller movie, concrete and shadows providing the backdrop for negotiations that would determine whether love or power would ultimately win in a game where everyone stood to lose everything. Richard arrived first, his black Mercedes gleaming under the industrial lights, while Alicia waited in the passenger seat, her hands pressed protectively over her growing belly. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, watching Marcus's silver Porsche pull into the loading dock. "I'm sure that our children deserve a future where they don't grow up visiting their father in federal prison." Richard's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd spent weeks preparing for war, only to discover that victory would cost him everything worth protecting. "But Alicia, what Marcus is asking for, it's not just about us anymore." Marcus emerged from his car wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket, looking more like a criminal than the polished businessman who'd seduced Richard's wife. The months of legal battles and financial warfare had taken their toll. His face was thinner, his eyes harder, his movements those of a man who'd run out of options except for the nuclear one. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to meet." "I'm here for my children," Richard replied coldly. "Both of them. What's your offer?" Marcus pulled a tablet from his jacket, setting it on a metal table that had probably been used for drug deals before tonight's negotiation. The screen showed bank account numbers, offshore company names, and transfer records that represented the evidence of Richard's crimes. Full deletion of all financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and documentation of your illegal business activities. Marcus began, his tone businesslike despite the personal history crackling between them. "I withdraw my cooperation with the FBI, claim the evidence was fabricated, and disappear from Atlanta permanently." "In exchange for what?" Marcus's expression darkened. "The Morrison Industries Pension Fund." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. The Morrison Industries Pension Fund contained retirement savings for 12,000 employees, teachers, construction workers, nurses, people who'd worked their entire lives for the security those accounts represented. "You want me to steal from retirees?" Richard's voice came out strangled. "I want you to redirect $40 million in pension investments through a shell company I control. The money gets lost in a market crash that I'll orchestrate, and I disappear with enough resources to start over somewhere the FBI can't find me." Alicia stepped out of the car, unable to listen to the conversation from a distance. "You're talking about destroying thousands of families. People who work their entire lives for that money." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been regret. "I'm talking about survival, Alicia. Richard has destroyed my business, frozen my assets, and made it impossible for me to fight him legally. This is my only way out. It's theft from innocent people. It's justice from someone who's stolen far more." Marcus's voice hardened. "Richard, you've taken hundreds of millions in taxpayer money through fraudulent contracts. You've destroyed competitors through illegal practices. You've bribed government officials and falsified environmental reports that put communities at risk. But I never stole from retirees. No, you just stole from everyone else." Marcus pulled up another file on his tablet. "The Atlanta airport expansion used substandard materials that will start failing in 5 years. The government housing project you won through bribes is built on contaminated land. The bridge contract you secured through falsified safety reports is already showing stress fractures. Each accusation hit Richard like a physical blow because they were true. In his desperate rush to build an empire worthy of Alicia's love, he'd cut corners that endangered innocent people. But stealing from a pension fund felt different. More personal, more directly harmful to families who trusted their life savings to legitimate investments. Would you sacrifice strangers to protect your family? How do you choose between personal happiness and greater good when both come at terrible cost? Those people have families, Alicia said quietly. Children who are counting on their grandparents' retirement money. Parents who sacrifice to build those savings. And I have a child who deserves a father who isn't in federal prison or dead from one of Richard's accidents. Marcus shot back. Your husband may not be a killer, Alicia, but he's made people disappear before. How long do you think I'll survive once the FBI case falls apart? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Richard had never killed anyone, but he destroyed lives so completely that the victims have been forced to relocate, change identities, start over with nothing. Marcus was right to be afraid. There has to be another way, Alicia insisted. There isn't. Richard's voice came out flat, defeated. Marcus has evidence that will send me to prison for 20 years minimum. The only way to protect our children from growing up without their father is to give him what he wants, even if it means destroying thousands of innocent families. Richard looked at his wife, the woman he'd committed crimes to impress, whose betrayal had led them to this impossible choice. In her eyes, he saw the moral clarity that had first attracted him. The nurse from Detroit who'd chosen her profession because she wanted to help people, who'd married a billionaire but kept working at the hospital because service mattered more than wealth. She would never forgive him for stealing from retirees. But she also couldn't raise 2 children alone while visiting their father in federal prison. I need to think about this, Richard said finally. Marcus shook his head. You have until tomorrow at noon to transfer the money. After that, I send everything to the FBI and disappear anyway. At least this way, your children get to keep their father. As Marcus walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse, Richard and Alicia stood in silence, surrounded by the weight of an impossible decision. Steal $40 million from innocent retirees or watch their family destroyed by federal prosecutors. What are we going to do? Alicia whispered. Richard pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent that had become home to him. I don't know, but whatever we decide together. They drove home in silence through Atlanta's empty streets, while in the distance, sirens wailed through the night like a warning of the chaos about to engulf everyone they loved. As Marcus walked away with Richard's answer, Alicia felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. The stress was affecting the babies. We need to get to the hospital, she gasped, but Richard's phone was already ringing with news that would change everything. Mr. Callahan, this is Agent Martinez with the FBI. We need to talk. The devil's bargain would have to wait. Their children were coming early, and the world was about to discover that some secrets can't be buried, no matter how much money changes hands. The FBI doesn't knock politely when they're investigating billionaires. They arrive like a storm that strips away every carefully constructed lie. The hospital room became a fortress under siege. Federal agents positioned outside while inside. Machines monitored 2 heartbeats that represented hope, fear, and the future of everyone whose lives had become entangled in this web. Alicia lay in the hospital bed, her face pale with exhaustion from 12 hours of early labor, while Richard held her hand and watched Agent Martinez flip through files that could destroy everything they'd built. Mrs. Callahan, Agent Martinez began, her voice professionally neutral despite the chaos surrounding them. We understand you're in a difficult situation, but we need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Marcus Webb. My wife just gave birth to premature twins, Richard interrupted, his protective instincts overriding his usual diplomatic approach. Whatever questions you have can wait until... Actually, Mr. Callahan, they can't. Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet showing financial records, bank transfers, and surveillance photos. We have evidence that Mr. Webb has been using information obtained through his relationship with your wife to manipulate government contracts and commit securities fraud. The words hit the room like bullets. Through the window, Atlanta's skyline stretched toward the horizon, completely unaware that in this sterile hospital room, 3 lives were about to change forever. Alicia squeezed Richard's hand, drawing strength from his presence despite everything that had happened between them. The babies were stable in the NICU, fighting for their lives while their parents fought for their freedom. "What kind of evidence?" Richard asked, though he suspected he already knew. Agent Martinez opened another file, revealing photographs of Richard and Alicia's penthouse, their private conversations recorded through surveillance equipment, financial records that showed exactly how Marcus had used insider information to destroy Richard's London contracts. Mr. Webb planted listening devices in your home during one of his visits with Mrs. Callahan. We have recordings of private conversations where you discussed confidential business matters, government contract details, and financial strategies. The betrayal hit Richard like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just seduced his wife. He'd violated the sanctity of their home, turned their most intimate moments into evidence for his war against Richard's empire. "He recorded us." Alicia's voice came out strangled. Dozens of hours of conversation. Some intimate, some business-related, all potentially valuable for someone looking to manipulate government contracts or stock prices. Richard's mind raced through the implications. Every private moment with Alicia, every vulnerable conversation about his business concerns, every intimate discussion about their future, all of it captured and weaponized by the man who'd claimed to love his wife. When authorities get involved in personal conflicts, whose side would you choose? Can love survive when it becomes evidence in a federal case? "What do you want from us?" Richard asked. Agent Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Callahan, we know about your business practices. The offshore accounts, the falsified reports, the questionable government contracts. But we also know that Marcus Webb has been manipulating the situation to serve his own criminal enterprise." She pulled out another document, this one showing Marcus's financial activities over the past 3 years. Webb has been running an insider trading operation, using information gathered through relationships with executives' wives to manipulate stock prices and government contract awards. Your wife wasn't his first target. She was his most successful one. The revelation hit Alicia like cold water. She hadn't been special to Marcus. She'd been a mark, another executive's wife to seduce and exploit for financial gain. "How many others?" she whispered. 7 wives in 3 years. All married to executives with government contracts or publicly traded companies. Webb's operation generated over $50 million in illegal profits. Richard's jaw clenched as he processed the scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise. The man hadn't just stolen his wife and his business secrets. He turned seducing married women into a systematic criminal operation. "We're offering you a deal," Agent Martinez continued. "Full cooperation with our investigation into Webb's insider trading network, and we'll recommend immunity for the crimes related to your government contracts." "What kind of cooperation?" "Testimony about how Webb obtained information through his relationship with Mrs. Callahan. Documentation of the financial damage to your business. Most importantly, we need you to help us gather evidence of his current criminal activities." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. In a NICU down the hall, 2 babies fought for their lives while their parents decided whether to destroy the man who'd already destroyed so much. "There's something else," Agent Martinez said quietly. "Webb contacted us this morning. He's willing to testify against you in exchange for immunity from his own crimes. Claims you were the mastermind behind a conspiracy to steal government contracts." Richard's blood ran cold. Marcus was still playing games, still trying to use the situation to his advantage. Even facing federal charges, he was attempting to frame Richard as the criminal mastermind while positioning himself as a cooperating witness. "That's a lie," Alicia said fiercely. "Marcus seduced me to gather information about Richard's business. He planted listening devices in our home. He manipulated me into betraying my husband. We know, but juries sometimes believe the witness who cooperates first." Agent Martinez closed her files, her expression serious. "Mr. Callahan, if you agree to work with us, We can protect you from Webb's false testimony and ensure he faces consequences for his crimes. If you don't, she didn't need to finish the sentence. If Richard refused to cooperate, Marcus would paint him as the villain while escaping justice for his systematic exploitation of marriage vows and government contracts. What exactly would you need us to do? Richard asked. Wear a wire during a meeting with Webb. Get him to confess to the insider trading operation and his plans to frame you. Give us enough evidence to ensure his conviction regardless of what lies he tells about your business practices. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Richard had spent his career avoiding federal investigations, building walls of lawyers and offshore accounts to protect his questionable business practices. Now he was being asked to become a federal informant against the man who'd seduced his wife. If we do this, what happens to Richard's business? Alicia asked. The government contract issues get resolved through civil restitution rather than criminal charges. Mr. Callahan pays back what he stole, accepts oversight of future contracts, but avoids prison time. Richard looked at his wife, the woman he'd committed crimes to impress, who betrayed him with his greatest enemy, who was now asking federal agents to protect the man who'd lied to them both. In her eyes, he saw not judgment, but determination. The same fierce loyalty that had made her choose him over safer options years ago. We'll do it, he said quietly. Agent Martinez smiled for the first time since entering the room. Good, because Webb just agreed to meet with you tonight. He thinks he's coming to collect payment for keeping quiet about your crimes. Instead, he's walking into a trap that will end his criminal enterprise forever. As Agent Martinez left to prepare the surveillance equipment, Richard held Alicia's hand and watched Atlanta's lights twinkle through the hospital windows. In the NICU, their children fought for their first breaths while their parents prepared to fight for their future. Agent Martinez's offer was simple and terrifying. Testify against Marcus and receive full immunity or face prosecution as co-conspirators. But before Richard could answer, Alicia's doctor rushed in with urgent news. We need to deliver these babies now, or we might lose them both. The war between Richard and Marcus was about to become a federal case, but first, two tiny lives needed their parents to choose love over revenge. In the delivery room where life and death decisions happened in seconds, Richard and Alicia learned that some battles can't be won with money or power, only with love. The NICU hummed with the sounds of life support. Tiny incubators holding two miracles that had arrived early to a world unprepared for their complexity, while outside the hospital, news vans gathered like vultures sensing a story. Richard stood between the incubators, one hand on each warm plastic dome. Watching his children fight battles, he couldn't win for them with corporate strategies or financial leverage. Baby A, his biological son, weighed 3 pounds and had his father's dark hair. Baby B, Marcus's biological daughter, weighed 2 pounds 14 ounces and had her mother's delicate features. Both babies breathed through ventilators, their tiny chests rising and falling with mechanical precision while their parents learned that some things mattered more than DNA. The next 48 hours are critical, Dr. Peterson explained, her voice gentle but honest. Their lungs are underdeveloped, and we're watching for signs of infection or bleeding in the brain. Premature twins face additional challenges because of the stress from sharing the womb. Alicia sat in a wheelchair beside the incubators, still weak from the emergency delivery, but unable to leave her children's side. The federal investigation, Marcus's threats, Richard's crimes, none of it mattered as much as watching these tiny beings fight for every breath. Can they hear us? She whispered. Studies suggest that premature babies respond to their parents' voices. Talk to them. Touch them gently through the ports in the incubators. Let them know you're here. Richard had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, faced down corporate raiders, and built an empire from nothing. But standing in this NICU, watching his son struggle to breathe, he felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. Hey, buddy, he whispered to baby, sliding his hand through the incubator port to stroke the infant's tiny arm. You're a fighter, just like your mom. You're going to be okay. Alicia reached for baby B, her fingers barely touching the little girl's hand. And you, Sweet baby, you're going to grow up strong and beautiful. Your daddy, she paused, the complexity of the situation hitting her. Your daddies are going to make sure you have everything you need. The words hung in the air between them. Both children would need explanations someday about why they had different fathers, why their family looked different from others, why love sometimes meant accepting complicated truths. A commotion in the hallway made them look up. Through the NICU windows, they could see Marcus Webb arguing with hospital security, Agent Martinez showing her badge, and news reporters pushing cameras toward the drama unfolding outside. He wants to see them, Agent Martinez said, entering the NICU with Marcus behind her. Mr. Webb has legal rights as a biological father, and the hospital can't deny access during visiting hours. Richard's entire body tensed as Marcus approached the incubators. The man who'd seduced his wife, stolen his business secrets, and threatened his family now stood 3 feet away, staring at the tiny girl who shared his DNA. Have you ever faced a crisis that put everything else into perspective? What matters most when life hangs in the balance? Marcus's face crumpled as he looked at baby B through the incubator walls. Whatever Richard had expected, arrogance, calculation, manipulation, it wasn't this. Marcus Webb, the corporate predator who'd built his fortune on exploiting others, looked at his biological daughter and started crying. She's so small, he whispered. 2 pounds 14 ounces, Alicia said quietly. The doctors say she's a fighter. Marcus reached toward the incubator, then stopped, his hand hovering over the access port. Is it okay if I touch her? The question broke Richard's heart in ways he hadn't expected. This was his enemy, the man who tried to destroy everything Richard had built. But it was also a father meeting his child for the first time, terrified and overwhelmed by the fragility of new life. Go ahead, Richard said, surprising himself. Marcus slid his hand through the incubator port, his fingers trembling as he touched his daughter's tiny hand. Baby B's fingers wrapped around his thumb with the instinctive grip that all newborns possessed, and Marcus sobbed openly. I'm sorry, he whispered, though it wasn't clear if he was apologizing to the baby, to Alicia, or to Richard. I'm so sorry for everything. She needs all the love she can get, Alicia said softly. They both do. The 3 adults stood in silence, watching 2 babies who couldn't understand the complicated world they'd been born into. Federal investigations, corporate crimes, and personal betrayals meant nothing to infants who just needed to grow strong enough to survive. Dr. Peterson returned with updates that made everyone forget their conflicts. Baby A's oxygen levels are improving, which is encouraging, but Baby B is showing signs of respiratory distress. We may need to adjust her ventilator settings. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency around Baby B's incubator, adjusting tubes and monitoring equipment, while her biological father watched helplessly from the sidelines. Richard found himself moving closer to Marcus, not as an enemy, but as another man watching a child fight for life. She's going to be okay, Richard said quietly. Marcus wiped his eyes, his voice broken. How can you even talk to me? After everything I did to your family? Because right now, you're not my business rival or the man who seduced my wife. You're the father of a baby girl who needs us to stop fighting and start figuring out how to protect her. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Martinez, who'd been waiting respectfully outside the NICU during the family crisis. Mr. Webb, we still need to discuss your testimony regarding the insider trading charges. Marcus looked at his daughter, then at Richard and Alicia, then back at the federal agent. I want to make a deal. Not for immunity, for restitution. I want to pay back every dollar I stole and serve whatever time you think is appropriate. But I want my daughter to grow up knowing her father took responsibility for his mistakes. The confession stunned everyone in the room. Marcus Webb, who'd built his criminal enterprise on manipulation and exploitation, was choosing accountability over self-preservation. Marcus, Agent Martinez said carefully, that's not how federal investigations work. We need your cooperation to build cases against other targets. Then build your cases without me. I'm done being a criminal. Marcus looked at Baby B through the incubator walls. I want to be the kind of man she can be proud of, even if I'm visiting her from prison." Richard stared at his former enemy, recognizing something he hadn't expected: genuine remorse and the desperate desire for redemption that comes with becoming a parent. "The meeting tonight," Richard said. "The wire, the surveillance. None of that's necessary anymore." Agent Martinez frowned. "Mr. Callahan, we still need evidence to prosecute the insider trading network. You have Marcus's confession and his willingness to provide documentation. You have the recordings he made and the financial records of his crimes. Build your case on evidence, not manipulation." As if responding to the peaceful resolution unfolding around them, both babies showed improved vital signs on their monitors. Baby A's oxygen levels continued rising, while baby B's respiratory distress began to ease. Dr. Peterson smiled as she checked the latest readings. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Both babies are responding well to the calm environment." Marcus stood at the NICU window, tears streaming down his face as he watched the baby that might be his son fight for every breath. When he turned to leave, he whispered to Richard, "I'm withdrawing all charges and giving you everything you need to bury me. Just let me know he's okay." But Alicia's next words stopped him cold. "Stay. They both need all the love they can get." Outside the hospital, news reporters waited for a scandal that was transforming into something unexpected. A story about forgiveness, accountability, and the power of new life to change even the hardest hearts. The NICU became a place where enemies learned that some things matter more than revenge, like watching tiny lungs take their first strong breaths. The hospital chapel was empty except for 3 people who had arrived as enemies but knelt together as something approaching family, while upstairs, 2 babies grew stronger with each passing hour. Richard sat in the front pew, his hands folded in prayer for the first time since childhood, while Alicia and Marcus flanked him like unlikely allies in a war against fear and uncertainty. "I never thought I'd be praying with the man who seduced my wife," Richard murmured, his voice echoing in the quiet space. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I never thought I'd be praying for a man I tried to destroy, to forgive me for seducing his wife. And I never thought I'd be praying for my husband and my lover to find a way to coexist for the sake of our children," Alicia added quietly. The honesty hung between them like incense, purifying the air of lies and manipulation that had brought them to this moment. Outside the chapel, Atlanta hummed with its usual busy energy, but inside this sacred space, 3 broken people were discovering what grace looked like in the face of impossible circumstances. "The doctors say both babies should be able to go home in 6 weeks, Alicia continued. "Baby A, we're calling him James, is gaining weight steadily. Baby B, Emma, is still struggling with her lungs, but she's fighting." Richard reached for Alicia's hand, the simple gesture carrying the weight of forgiveness and renewed commitment. "James Richard Callahan and Emma Grace Callahan. Both of them Callahans, regardless of biology." Marcus looked up sharply. "You're giving her your name?" "She's my daughter in every way that matters. You provided the genetics, Marcus, but I'm going to be your father." Richard's voice carried the quiet certainty that had built his empire, now redirected toward building something more important than wealth. "If you want to be part of her life, we'll figure that out. But she's a Callahan." The generosity of the gesture broke something open in Marcus's chest. The man he tried to destroy was offering him redemption, a place in his daughter's life despite everything that had happened between them. "I don't deserve that," Marcus whispered. "None of us deserves grace," Alicia replied. "That's what makes it grace." Agent Martinez appeared in the chapel doorway, her expression respectful of the sacred moment she was interrupting. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we've received some developments regarding the federal investigation." The 3 of them followed her to a small conference room where legal documents covered a table like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Marcus's confession had opened doors that led to a network of corruption larger than anyone had imagined. Mr. Webb's cooperation has helped us identify 17 other executives involved in the insider trading network, Agent Martinez explained. "We've also uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving 3 senators and 12 federal contractors. Richard studied the documents with the analytical mind that had made him successful. Where does this leave us? Mr. Callahan, your cooperation and restitution agreement will result in probation and community service rather than prison time. Mr. Webb's full confession and asset forfeiture will likely result in a reduced sentence, possibly 5 years instead of 20. 5 years. Marcus would miss Emma's first steps, first words, first day of school. But he would be alive, and he would eventually have a chance to be part of her life. What about the pension fund? Alicia asked. The Morrison Industries retirees. Are their savings safe? Agent Martinez smiled. Mr. Webb never actually touched that money. The threat was a bluff to pressure Mr. Callahan into a confession. The pension fund is secure. The relief on Richard's face was profound. He'd been prepared to sacrifice his soul to protect his family. But Marcus's final manipulation had been as empty as all his other promises. Have you ever seen enemies become allies through shared crisis? Can forgiveness sometimes create stronger bonds than blood? There's one more thing, Agent Martinez continued. The media attention around this case has prompted several other wives to come forward. Mr. Webb's victims want to see justice, but they also want to see healing. Some of them are proposing a class action lawsuit, not for money, but to fund counseling services for families affected by corporate espionage and infidelity. The idea sparked something in Alicia's mind, a foundation. We could create something that helps families rebuild after betrayal, that provides resources for couples dealing with corporate crime and its personal consequences. Richard looked at his wife with renewed admiration. Even in the middle of their own crisis, she was thinking about helping others facing similar struggles. I'd like to contribute, Marcus said quietly. All of my remaining assets, after restitution to the government. It's not enough to repair the damage I've caused, but it's a start. The foundation idea grew as they talked, transforming from a simple legal settlement into something that could help thousands of families navigate the complex intersection of personal betrayal and professional crime. 6 weeks later, they returned to the chapel for a different kind of ceremony. James and Emma Callahan were being baptized, surrounded by an unlikely family that had been forged in crisis and tempered by grace. Richard held James, while Alicia held Emma, both babies healthy and growing strong. Marcus stood beside them, not as an enemy or even as a lover, but as Emma's biological father who was learning to become something more valuable, a man worthy of being part of a child's life. The pastor spoke about redemption, about how love could transform even the most broken relationships into something beautiful. As water touched the babies' foreheads, Alicia felt tears streaming down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from gratitude for the unexpected path that had led them to this moment. After the ceremony, as they gathered in the hospital lobby for photographs, Marcus pulled Richard aside. I know I have no right to ask this, but when I get out of prison, would it be possible for me to be part of Emma's life? Not as a father. You'll always be your father. But maybe as someone who loves her and wants to help her grow up strong. Richard considered the request carefully. 5 years ago, he would have destroyed Marcus completely for even asking. But fatherhood had changed him, shown him that some things were more important than pride or revenge. We'll figure it out, he said finally, one day at a time. As the unlikely family posed for photographs, Atlanta's skyline sparkled through the hospital windows, and somewhere in the NICU, 2 empty incubators waited for the next premature babies who would need miracles to survive. 6 months later, as both babies thrived, Richard made an announcement that shocked Atlanta's business community. He was starting a foundation with Marcus Webb focused on supporting families in crisis. But the real surprise came when Alicia revealed her own news at the press conference. The chapel that had witnessed their brokenness had also witnessed their healing, proving that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose love over biology, forgiveness over revenge. The foundation built from betrayal became a testament to what's possible when people choose healing over revenge. The foundation's opening ceremony filled Atlanta's Civic Center with families who had benefited from second chances, while on stage, Three people who had nearly destroyed each other demonstrated the power of choosing grace over revenge. Richard stood at the podium, his Navy suit impeccable as always, but his face carried the softness that comes from learning that some victories matter more than others. 2 years ago, I thought success meant building the biggest company, accumulating the most wealth, controlling every situation through power and money, Richard began, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium. Today, I understand that real success means building something that lasts beyond your own life, something that helps other people find hope in their darkest moments. In the front row, Alicia held 18-month-old Emma, while James played with toy cars at her feet. Both children were healthy, thriving, and completely unaware that their existence had once threatened to destroy everyone around them. Marcus sat beside Alicia, wearing the simple clothes of a man who'd traded designer suits for prison uniforms, but found something more valuable than wealth in the process. The Callahan Webb Foundation for Family Restoration had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a legal settlement had become a network of counseling centers, financial assistance programs, and support groups that helped families navigate the aftermath of corporate crime, infidelity, and broken trust. This foundation exists because three people learned that you can't build lasting happiness on lies, manipulation, or revenge, Richard continued. My wife, Alicia, taught me that love sometimes means forgiving the unforgivable. Marcus Webb taught me that redemption is possible for anyone willing to face their mistakes honestly. And our children taught us all that some things are more important than being right. The audience, filled with couples who'd survived corporate scandals, families who'd rebuilt after betrayal, and individuals who'd found second chances through the Foundation's programs, erupted in applause. Alicia took the podium next, her presence commanding despite her soft voice. When I first held that ultrasound photo showing two heartbeats with different fathers, I thought my world was ending. I was wrong. It was beginning. Sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the pieces of broken ones. She looked at Marcus, who was scheduled to return to federal prison in 3 months to serve the remainder of his sentence. Marcus made terrible choices that hurt many people, including himself. But he also made one choice that changed everything. He chose to take responsibility for his actions and work to repair the damage he'd caused. Marcus approached the podium slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he looked out at the crowd. Public speaking had never terrified him before, but addressing an audience as a convicted felon seeking redemption was different from presenting to corporate boards as a successful executive. I stole money, manipulated people, and destroyed families for my own gain, Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper before growing stronger. I can't undo those choices, but I can dedicate the rest of my life to helping repair the damage I caused. This foundation represents every dollar I stole, every life I damaged, every family I hurt, transformed into something that builds instead of destroys. What would you build from the ashes of betrayal? How do you think forgiveness changes not just relationships, but entire communities? The ceremony continued with testimonials from families who'd benefited from the foundation services. A woman whose husband's corporate crimes had left her bankrupt and alone, now working as a program coordinator, helping other wives navigate similar crises. A teenager whose father was serving time for fraud, now mentoring other children of incarcerated parents. A couple who'd survived infidelity and financial ruin, now running marriage counseling workshops. Each story reinforced the same truth. Healing was possible, but it required choosing hope over bitterness, action over blame, community over isolation. After the ceremony, the three founders gathered in Alicia's campaign headquarters for Atlanta City Council. The walls were covered with posters showing Alicia holding both children with the slogan, "Families first, communities strong." "Are you ready for this?" Richard asked, straightening Alicia's campaign pin. City politics can be brutal. Alicia smiled, bouncing Emma on her hip while James played with building blocks nearby. "I've survived federal investigations, premature births, and learning to co-parent with my husband and my former lover. I think I can handle the Atlanta City Council." Marcus laughed from his position on the floor, where he was helping James build a tower. Besides, if anyone tries to attack your character, they'll have to explain why they're criticizing someone who turned a personal scandal into one of George's most successful charitable foundations. The campaign had been surprisingly smooth. Alicia's story of redemption and community building resonated with voters who were tired of politicians who'd never faced real consequences for their mistakes. Her platform focused on supporting families in crisis, improving healthcare access, and creating economic opportunities for people rebuilding their lives after setbacks. Richard's role in the campaign was mostly financial. His reformed business practices had made him wealthier than ever, and he used that wealth to support Alicia's political ambitions and the foundation's expanding programs. But he also served as living proof that powerful men could change, that success didn't require stepping on others. "Win or lose, I'm proud of you," Richard told Alicia as they prepared to leave for her final campaign event. 3 years ago, you were afraid to speak up at corporate dinners. Now you're running for public office to help other families. 3 years ago, I thought happiness meant avoiding conflict and keeping secrets, Alicia replied. Now I know it means facing truth with courage and building something beautiful from broken pieces. Marcus would return to federal prison in 3 months, but he would serve the remainder of his sentence knowing that Emma was growing up in a loving home, that his financial crimes had been transformed into charitable giving, and that he had played a role in creating something lasting and positive. The evening ended with all 3 adults tucking both children into their beds, James in his race car-themed room, Emma in her Princess Castle nursery. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of family life. Bath time splashing, bedtime stories, lullabies sung by parents who'd learned that love was more complicated and more powerful than they'd ever imagined. As Alicia addressed the crowd, holding one baby while Richard held the other, she announced her decision to run for Atlanta City Council. Sometimes the best way forward is to turn your pain into purpose. But in the audience, a figure from her Detroit past watched with interest, holding information that could support her campaign or destroy it. The foundation that had grown from scandal and betrayal now served thousands of families, proving that sometimes the most devastating secrets become the foundation for the most beautiful transformations. The ultrasound photo that once threatened to destroy everything now sits framed in a foundation office, a reminder that secrets can become strengths when faced with courage. The campaign victory party filled their penthouse with voices of hope, while through the windows, Atlanta's skyline sparkled with possibility. And in the nursery, 2 cribs held children who would grow up knowing that love conquers even the deepest betrayals. Alicia stood at the center of the celebration, wearing a simple blue dress and the kind of smile that comes from finding purpose in pain, surrounded by supporters who believed in second chances and redemption over scandal and shame. "Councilwoman Callahan," Richard said, testing out the title as he handed her a glass of sparkling cider. "I like the sound of that." 3-year-old James tugged on his father's jacket, holding up a drawing he'd made of their family. Stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with "Mommy Wins" written in crooked letters across the top. Emma sat nearby in her high chair, clapping her hands and babbling happily as party guests took turns congratulating the newest member of Atlanta's city government. Marcus stood near the windows, watching the celebration with the quiet contentment of a man who'd found peace in the most unlikely circumstances. He'd been released from federal prison 6 months early for good behavior, exceptional contributions to the Foundation's prison outreach program. Now he lived in a small apartment downtown, worked as a counselor for white-collar criminals seeking redemption, and spent weekends as Uncle Marcus to 2 children who didn't understand why some people thought their family was complicated. "You did it," he said, approaching Alicia as the crowd began to thin. "From scandal to city council in 4 years. That's got to be some kind of record." Alicia laughed, the sound lighter than it had been the dark days when secrets threatened to destroy everything she loved. "We all did it." This campaign was about proving that families can heal, that communities can choose grace over gossip, that sometimes the most broken people become the strongest leaders. The evening wound down with the kind of quiet domestic chaos that had become normal in their unconventional household. Richard gave both children baths, while Alicia fielded calls from reporters and political allies. Marcus cleaned up party dishes and helped put away toys, moving through their home with the comfortable familiarity of extended family. Later, after the children were asleep and Marcus had returned to his apartment, Richard and Alicia sat on their bedroom balcony overlooking the city Alicia would now help govern. The penthouse that had once felt like a prison of wealth and isolation now felt like home, a place where love had survived its greatest tests. "Any regrets?" Richard asked, pulling Alicia close as they watched Atlanta's lights twinkle in the darkness. "About the affair? About the lies? About nearly destroying our marriage?" Alicia considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain we caused each other. I regret that our children will grow up with a more complicated story than most. But I don't regret where we ended up." She placed her hand on her growing belly, where another Callahan baby was developing. This one conceived in love and honesty rather than desperation and deception. This little one will grow up in a family that chose healing over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness. That's not a bad legacy. Richard's hand covered hers, and they sat in comfortable silence, thinking about the journey that had brought them from ultrasound secrets to campaign victories. The foundation now operated in 12 states, helping thousands of families navigate the aftermath of corporate crime and personal betrayal. Alicia's political career was just beginning, with supporters already talking about runs for state legislature or even governor. So what would you do if an ultrasound photo changed your life forever? Would you run from the truth or use it to build something beautiful? Tell me in the comments what you learned from Alicia and Richard's journey. "I have something for you," Richard said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. An early Christmas present. Inside was a pendant, a simple silver heart engraved with the words "full circle" and the dates of James and Emma's births. It was beautiful in its simplicity, meaningful without being ostentatious. "It's perfect," Alicia whispered, fastening the chain around her neck. "We came full circle," Richard explained. "From that first medical conference where we met, to the ultrasound that nearly destroyed us, to watching our children play while you planned your first city council meeting. Everything that broke us also made us stronger." The phone rang, interrupting their quiet moment. Alicia's campaign manager was calling with final vote tallies and media requests, but Richard suggested letting it go to voicemail. Some moments were too precious to interrupt with the demands of public life. "Tomorrow we start the real work," Alicia said, settling back into Richard's arms. "Helping other families, improving the city, showing people that government can be about service instead of self-interest. And tonight we're just Richard and Alicia Callahan, grateful for 2 healthy children, a marriage that survived its worst test, and the chance to turn our mistakes into something that helps other people."